Back in 2000, a judge said something in a divorce case that, let me tell you, set off some serious fireworks in India's legal world. And we're still talking about it. It all boils down to one really simple but tough question.
So think about it. What's actually fair in a divorce? When a couple decides to go their separate ways, who's on the hook for the bills? And what happens when one person is totally capable of working, but they just choose not to? That's the million-dollar question at the heart of this whole story. And the answer one judge came up with, wow, it echoed through courtrooms for decades. Okay, so listen to this. These are the explosive words from Justice J.G. Chitray in the case of Mamta Jaiswal versus Rajesh Jaiswal. He wasn't just making a ruling here. He was making a huge statement about personal responsibility. And in doing that, he basically created a legal idea that would change, well, pretty much everything. So first up, let's really unpack that. We're going to break down the judge's powerful statement and the case that set it all off. Because, this wasn't just some dry legal disagreement. This was a full-on clash of principles about what alimony's even for. Okay, now let's meet the two people at the center of this whole storm. Like so many huge legal battles, this whole thing started with a very personal fight between a husband and a wife. So on one side, you have the petitioner, Mamta Jaiswal. And this is super important. Look at her qualifications. She had multiple master's degrees. We're talking an MSc, an MC, and an MEd. I mean, by any standard, this woman was highly, highly educated. And on the other side, that was her husband, Rajesh Jaiswal. He was a sub-engineer, and he's actually the one who filed for divorce, saying it was on the grounds of cruelty. But here's the thing. The legal fight that made history wasn't really about the divorce itself. Nope. It was about the money she asked for while the whole thing was going on. And that brings us to this key legal idea, interim maintenance. Under Section 24 of India's Hindu Marriage Act, it's basically like a temporary financial safety net. The whole point is to help a spouse who can't support themselves during what can be a really long, drawn-out legal process. But the keyword here, the one that matters most, it's cannot. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of their fight. You'd think a case this famous, this influential, would be about a ton of money, right? But what's so wild is that this entire legal showdown was over a surprisingly small amount. So let's just look at the numbers. Rajesh Jaiswal's gross monthly salary was just a little over 5,800 rupees. And remember, that's the total amount before any of his own expenses or deductions were taken out. Now, let's look at Mamta's side of the financial picture. It's not like she was just qualified on paper. She had a recent work history. Just a few years before all this, back in 1994, she was making 4,000 rupees a month as a teacher. So the point is, she had a proven ability to earn money. Okay, so a lower court had already looked at this and ordered Rajesh to pay Mamta 800 rupees a month for her support. But Mamta, she felt that just wasn't enough. So she took it to the High Court, hoping to get that amount increased. And that, right there, is where the real fireworks started. Their arguments were actually pretty simple. Mamta's side was, hey, the maintenance isn't enough. I don't have a job right now, I have no income, and I need more to get by. But Rajesh's defense was, hold on, she's incredibly qualified and she's choosing not to work just to put the financial squeeze on me. And, he added, he had his own big expenses to deal with, like loans and transportation costs. So this all set the stage for the High Court's big decision. And Justice Chitray, well, he didn't just rule on the 800 rupees. He delivered a judgment that would become a cornerstone of divorce law, all because of his really powerful reasoning. The judge's entire thinking really came down to one single critical difference. He saw a massive gap between someone who genuinely could not find work or was unable to work, and a highly educated person who just wasn't working. He basically said the law is there to protect the first person, not the second. And he did not mince words. He stated that a person involved in a divorce case can't just be allowed to sit idle and expect their spouse to foot the bill, especially when they have the skills and qualifications to earn their own living. So the final verdict was crystal clear. The court completely dismissed Mamta's request to get more maintenance. The judge decided that her being unemployed was a choice, an attempt to financially squeeze her husband. Now, it's important to note they didn't cancel the original 800 rupee payment, but they absolutely, emphatically refused to increase it. And that decision, made more than 20 years ago, it didn't just end one couple's argument. Oh no.
It cast a really long shadow, creating a legal precedent that is still being debated in family courts all across India today. This ruling became famous for what's now called the idle army doctrine. It pretty much immediately became the standard, go-to defense for husbands trying to argue against paying maintenance. Lawyers started citing this case all the time, basically saying, hey, if a wife can work, she shouldn't get any support.
But, how did the law change after this? For years, the Mamta Jaiswal precedent was used to argue that a potential income should be treated just like an actual income. But then, later on, the Supreme Court added another layer to this. They clarified that, hold on, just because someone has a degree doesn't mean they can snap their fingers and get a job. There's a real difference between being capable of earning and actually earning.
So, what are the big takeaways from all of this? Well, first, this case brought the idea of voluntary idleness right into the heart of maintenance law, forcing courts to ask why someone isn't working. Second, and this is pretty interesting, the principle turned out to be gender neutral. It also meant a highly qualified husband couldn't just quit his job and demand his wife support him. And finally, while this case is still a huge landmark, its central idea is now in this constant tug of war with the real-world challenges of finding a job today. And all of this brings us right back to that central dilemma. The case of Mamta Jaiswal really forced the legal system to face a super tough question that still has no easy answer. In the eyes of the law, should what you could earn matter just as much as what you are earning? It's a question that courts and, of course, couples are still wrestling with today.